Right. Good morning. Let's start with Lavatsungkapa Guru Yoga, and then Geshe will lead the way with Refuge and Bodhicitta. From the heart of the savior of 100 deities of the Shita on the peak of cloud and resounding clap of the screaming branch, King of Dharma, omniscient Losandrapa, please come here together with your sons. In the sky before me on lion throne, lotus and moon, my perfect pure Guru smiles with delight. Supreme field of merit from a mind of faith, please abide for 100 eons to spread the teachings. Your holy mind is the intelligence that understands the full extent of object to be known. Your holy speech with its excellent explanations is an ear ornament for those of good fortune. Your holy body is radiantly beautiful with glory renowned. To you are meaningful to see, hear, and remember are prostrate. Pleasant drinking water, various flowers, fragrant incenses, light, scented waters, and so forth. Ocean of cloud-like offerings, both actually arranged and mentally emanated. I offer to you the supreme field of merit. Whatever non-virtue of body, speech, and mind, especially those opposite to the three vows that I have collected from beginningless time, I confess each and every one with fervent regret from my heart. You strive for much learning and practice in this degenerate age and made your freedoms and richnesses meaningful by abandoning the eight worldly concerns. Savior, we sincerely rejoice in your extensive deeds. Perfect, pure, holy gurus from the billion clouds of wisdom and compassion in the sky of the Dharmakaya. Please let fall a rain of fun, extensive Dharma upon the receptacle of those to be subdued exactly as they need. Now, whatever virtue I have collected benefited teachings and all transmigratory beings, and in particular may it cause the essence of perfect, pure, Losandrapa's teachings to shine forever. Sa shi po ki ju shi me to tam ri ra ling shi ni de gen pa di san ge shindu mi te o wa gi ro ku nam dam shin la chu fa shu. By the merits of having offered this mandala to Lama Tsongkhapa and his two sons, may I, my family members, and all sentient beings be able to meet, practice, and actualize the teachings of victorious ones, Losandrapa, who had a morality of an eminently pure way of life, was courageous in the extensive conduct of the standards of victorious ones, and accomplished the yoga of two stages of supreme bliss and emptiness. Idang Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniyatayami. By the force of having fervently requested in this way, hollow beams of white lights are emitted from the hearts of the perfect pure fathers and sons, and combining into one's enter my crown. White nectar, the color of milk, flows from the opening of tube of white light, cleansing all my sicknesses, spirit harms, negative karmas, obscurations, and the imprints without exception. My body becomes as pure and clear as crystal. So I'm going to go up to page 13 and do the 5-line mixing verse 3 times. Mimetse wete chen chen rezi, jime kembe wampo jampe ya, dupu malu jamze sanweda, kanche kembe tsugen tsongapa, losandra pesham la sowa de, mimetse wete chen chen rezi, jime kembe wampo jampe ya, dupu malu jamze sanweda, Kanche gembe tsuge tsongapa, Losandra pesham la sowa de, mimetse wete chen chen rezi, jime kembe wambo jampe, dupu malu jonze sanweda, kanche gembe tsugen tsongapa, Losandra pesham la sowa de.
Sangye chedan tsogin chonam la chanchu bardu dani kyab sunchi dagi chushi gibin sonam drolam benshi sangye drupara sho. Sangye chedan tsogin chonam la chanchu bardu dani kyab sunchi dagi chushi gibin sonam gi drolam benshi sangye drupara sho. Sangye chedan tsogin chonam la chanchu bardu dani kyabsun dagi chushi gibin chonam drolam benshi sangye drupara sho. Kanki tuzi nizoni tawa tamche pambi chere tambi chun denzi kodam jela chanze lo. Good morning. 다들 먼저 같이 참디 니발 lardo top sedi. Ini masyari shastra nibal lardo top.
Top color?
Nibal sumba.
Okay.
Top shinan.
Sumba wala.
Yeah.
All right. So we've been looking at Lama Tsongkhapa's presentation of the status of the path of enlightenment. It's his middling presentation. And currently we are looking at a section of purifying negative actions using the 4 paths of the antidote. Now we're going to pick up on the place that we left off in the previous session. So we're going to pick up from the third point, third power, the power of turning away from further faults.
Terda 당한주 샤담 치고 그랬어. 샤담 가르친 치고 그랬어. 라운디다 레미게 마부슈직 아니 사샤요레 사심바레 아니 직 마음발이다 상예바도직 어딘지 직 털어여반자 다 샤담 마치나 가르치 그랬어. 라운디 동아용 그랬어. 라 민디비 동안 토드바위인 거래서 다 동안 되게 반자 다 동안 되게 반자 다 인지민지 때문에 동안 그규 아니 레미기와 되기디 바 싸마소고 그래서 샤고 그래서 샤담 치고 그래서 드렌도 왔으러다.
So this is part of the application of the 4 powers in which we lay down and restrain, which means we purify actions done before. We purify non-virtues. So we have already accumulated non-virtues in the past. We are accumulating non-virtues at the present. And we will also continue to accumulate negative actions in the future, or non-virtuous actions in the future, and without laying them down and restraining our mind, without purifying them, we will experience suffering in the future. Suffering will befall upon us, unwished for suffering. And therefore, we have to clean up, or we have to lay down and restrain our mind from those non-virtues. We have to purify them.
nga lo mang bu shu ji la ya kar se da cha sa shang kon ra shang chö den shang de de ma do le me ge che me sa ma na ta nga zu shar de shor la ya shor re ji in sa res ro shar de shor la ya ben ta nga zu chö chi in sa ji ni chö de che na ya wo ji ma shi na ani me ge shar re ji de ba shar re ji ges ya da ma yung go sa res tin za ani chi le me ge che me sa ma di
So some might think that I've done nothing wrong. There's no negative actions or non-virtuous actions that I need to lay down. Throughout my life, for years, I've been making tsatsas, building statues, making stupas, and so forth. So there's no non-virtue and negativity that I need to lay down. But even if we are engaged in these activities, making tattas, building statues, creating stupas, and so forth, indirectly, you can say here and there on the side, we also create non-virtuous actions. So even while we do practice the Dhamma, if we do not know correctly or precisely how to do so, inevitably we still end up creating negative actions, non-virtuous actions. So we still need to lay them down.
당이 직진 제가 세모로진 당원 제가 원이 있어라. 변한가지다 이 취식위에서 납치 취식위에서 납치 카말론 데비리나야 디벌 인조야기 년가 빼침부 다 연구여스 라 비게 강시바 강상바디 아니 지 직딘 취지 소리야 침바이나 다가란다 디바레스 디기오마레스 라 틴자다 가서다 다 짱부 쇼체 간지 기위 취지 지기여바나 기위 취디 아니 기위 취 남달라야 로얄이야 다지 아니 짱부 쇼체 로체직디 딤 템바야 땐 마치바이나 안 디기 아니 자원 로번 줘야겠다 년가 빼침부 디어서레스로
So Geshe mentioned, given, if we create sattas and statues and stupas, in some sense you can say that Geshe is kind of joking, but actually it's not just joking. It's could really be the case in which we think that I am practicing the Dhamma. I've been practicing the Dhamma all along, and now we sit down and claim that we have been practicing the Dhamma, but still we are, you can say, facing the danger of either in the way that we think or the things that we do, that we create negative actions, non-virtuous actions. If we fall prey to the 8 worldly concerns, if we are swayed by the 8 worldly concerns, then whatever we do under the power of the 8 worldly concerns will become negative. It is a negativity. So if you are really smart about the way that you approach your Dhamma practice, your practice of virtues, Dhammas, and you become really focused, you can do it. But actually, without being really focused on the practice of virtues, Dhammas, without being kind of really smart about it, without doing it purely, there's still a danger that we will act in a way that is negative.
디레다 베나 냠뇽도 지려야 나래 냠뇽도 지려야 가서도 꼴롱도 짱만 지금 매바이나 아니 자와 가리 바이나야 디야부 연구문도 왔더라 디 베나 당이 쇼기 따반도 지려야 저들도지 티 뜻이 나중으로도 지 지고라스다 까불어야 지 드링이 야부지 시고 삼지 등이 야부지 시에 탈지 비려야지 아니 배제도 배탈 당연히 야부시고 섬 레바이나 디니모들 간시바디 가서다 콜롱코르레 당연히 셴바키 요마다 자치 야부시고 섬 레바이나 델레니 시온디 직 소수기 샘나마야지 박페부 소르지 마용이 숙치안도스 야지야다 딩알도스라 딩알은 게인이라다 디마인 바다 피기려야지 쇼기에 쳐버지 아니 소수 간시지지 펜 간도지도 chen 로고아 삼성 담자로지 마용 안 진짜로지 치든 진짜 치비를 기부 칙사디나 단 딕송 삼성로지 말디 초 몽불레송스 디자 콜롱디 당알 삼발야 또 콜롱디 페케치무레샤 삼비 초 숙침부 페이스 디자 아주 자와 가르쳐 봐야냐 콜롱 야부지여바나 디인제부 야부 연구여바다 콜롱디 잔디 페기 총롱 소르지 신디난기 된다 소르지 얘네 삼론 들어와이나 야지자다 받는데 추 돌은 로기여 삼아레스 라
And Geshe is saying that based upon his own personal experience, in a sense that part of his responsibilities here is to teach Dharma sessions in the morning. So then without having pure motivation, without doing it with a pure motivation, the activities that are done or the actions that he takes are not necessarily coming through in a positive way, in a good way. So as we said, daily, almost every day, Geshe teaches certain sessions here. So if he corrects his motivation in the morning in a particular way, like for example, if he thinks that today I just want to give good teachings, I want to teach it well. The motivation is whatever I'm going to teach, the motivation is I want to teach it well. It's hard to really allow the mind to be relaxed or at ease. Whereas if the motivation is corrected in thinking that whatever I teach today, may that be of benefit to others. In whatever way I can, may that be of benefit to others. Geshe feels that at the end, the outcome is that whatever he does, he feels quite satisfied that things have gone well because it thinks that it does bring some benefit to some people. So then whatever we do in terms of first of correcting our motivation, if we correct the positive motivation, it will bring about a good outcome. Whereas if our motivation is self-centered, if we are mainly concerned about affairs of this life, whatever we do, whatever we practice in itself does not become Dharma.
The Dirina Chadam Mosongi, Shawan the Kirchene, Digbe Megiwata, Chameva Sayabati, Geshe Jatamba Ichichi, Ichichi, that Digi Choji said the Chibin Julia, that Digi Tower show something, that did Tandaba and Numun Shuchin, that Sherbari, that Tandangi Numun singing. Dunga Tsawa Imajik Shinche, Rantraje, Anita Lamagishi, Gadildin, Rantraje, the Mong, but this I want to mark you watch Chigi Yambi, big Tamja Shas in the row. Oh, those Chini, any Nibal Dobby, Top Telia, Tembinos, any Munki, Sasha Bigi, Digby, Driving Yom Mogowaji, Yasiyatama Chagaris, Tisungudo,
So then looking at the third power, the power of turning away from further faults. So when we lay down and restrain our mind, when we lay down negativities, restrain our mind, which is to say that when we purify the negative actions, we do that with a genuine motivation as much as we can, with a genuine attitude, and thinking that, in recognizing that since time without beginning and up until now, our mind has been affected by anger, attachment, and ignorance. We have come under the sway of those afflictive states of mind, and we have accumulated negativities and non-virtuous actions. And when we develop a complete trust that we have done so, 100% trust that we have accumulated negative actions under the power of anger, attachment, and ignorance since time without beginning and up until now, then we think that, may I purify them, and do so in the presence of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions. So in their presence, in the presence of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions, we think of a mind having been affected by afflictive states of mind. It has been affected by the root of afflictive states of mind. And we think that in the presence of the lamas, the virtuous friends, we think of making that promise not to do them again in the future. I shall not do that again. This is the third power, the power of turning away from faults. So if we practice it in this way, as the text says, then it is certain, 100% certain, that we will not come to experience the result of the negative actions and activities that we have done before.
Nima Tagba, Lengoyach, Yunguras, the D. Kabdulaya, Zode, Piggy, Dombasonia, chanju sembe domba sanga ga domba sonya di zoji teni shagdam chiya di zoji ta choga khanda jimen 가장 현직 시사에서 choga khanda jimen야 choga 된 사회 질라야 많이 용수 마시다 가연 뉴비 많지바 는 자와 관계 대근주의 존재리세 조설 치야 디페 마스바 개체 묻히니 송구도 디즈 소수기 비에 따지 아 담미 저 마로 버치야 와이나다 소소 슈고와 임바 이나 삼반남다 기 저 가르치야 와이나 단도 디나와 소수기 아니 콜롱고 마죠바 아니 니비 만당바 따지 마시발로 써봐 딘디지 총이여 와이나 디 디요 마라스 오 딘til라 템비 아니 단다디 아니 소수를 그 찍디 가두 때 봐이나 디페 마스바 야부차고 서레스 저 가르쳐 봐야냐 디젤이야 딘디지 쌈투 봐야나 아니 빼 야부차고 서레스.
And also we can add to that a reference to some of the practices that we do. Such, for example, if you daily do a recitation of the practice of the Vajrayana, in which you do a self-generation practice, you recite the practice of the self-generation. If you also include that with just second dila khasa di kran tuntu den lagi ya mana di ngalame di dakegi
다지 디 샤담 그
okay so
조술
zada ine dila johnson domatan sangagi domba dila tuntu den lagi ya
다지
mana
디 tun두랑 말이나
la tuntu lagi
다지 디 domba 송고도 왔어.
zada dake dagamanga.
아리야.
So then if we do a self-generation sadhana, then also within a self-generation sadhana, there's a section, one of the sections of the practice is taking upon yourself the bodhisattva vow, taking upon yourself the mantra vow. And if we do so, we also need to lay down negativities and restrain our mind to purify negativities and non-virtues. So that if we do such a practice daily, it's good at the end of our practice, after the recitation of this sadhana, the practice manual, to include an additional verse in which we ask forgiveness or forbearance for any mistakes or omissions or things that we did not do well in our practice, things that we couldn't do because of a lack of substance or implements or whatever mistakes or faults have arisen in our practice, we ask forgiveness. So whatever we have done because of unknowingness, whatever we failed to do well because of not knowing how to do it, because of omission, because of not having proper motivation, because not being able to do so, because we did not know how to do it well. It's important not to just kind of leave it like that, but also to think about it and to recite that verse that Geshe was referring to in asking forgiveness. So if you then, or forbearance. So if you include that within the practices that you do, Geshe feels that you will have a good outcome.
랭에다 배치샤다 나를 촉보랑을 배차이라다 콘라샹 온디로 콘라샹 최대 샹비 갑들이야 먼저 송주 피고 그러스 송주 피온디 담보다 지 안에 송주 되네지 답이 방으로 다 센된 쇼지 다 남유치월다 이내다 삽쇼 드리질이야 데딩 안수 차견된 방금도 차견은 만당디 코랑 밥이다 지 쟤는 로고 그러스 다 디드르비 갑들이야 아니 인치미치기 단다 많이 용수 마시다 가연 리뷰 마시바 데니 자와 간지바 대근지 존재를 세야 배 마스바 개침부 인사를 상고도스라 이제 간주 초조네 베이다 샤제비 사자린 최대를 두 가사깔라 안 배마무도 아니 지난 배 야부도 왔다 팬도 배 마무도 왔으라 다 디냠도 아니 팬도도 냠도 개시 딘지 아니 지 차이행 만담을 써봐 만상을 써봐 근데 셔츠 미스고 말아봤어 진짜 디냠도 딘디겠다 아니 소수르기 찍던 봐나 되니 배마스바 수수기 차 참을로디 야구 차야기 고급 체시질에 넣어서라
So Geshe is taking this opportunity to mention that point because particularly, one of Geshe's friends, who shall not be named, is here, making stupas and tsasas and so forth. So it's actually kind of good to think about including that also in our practice of creating stupas, tsasas, statues, and so forth. So in the creation of such things, for example, statues and stupas, we normally fill them together with mantras and other substances. And the first step is to consecrate all the precious things that go into this statue. Then you need to fill the statue with those consecrated things in the right sequence. Then you kind of seal the gap with santons with like sandalwood, sawdust, and so forth. So it's important to do it in the right way, but also not always we have all the right conditions, all the facilities to go through the process in the right way, in the correct way. So Geshe feels that particularly in those situations where it's hard, actually here in Australia, let's say, it's hard to make sure that we have all the right conditions for doing everything correctly and perfectly. It's important to include that verse in a practice, kind of asking forbearance, forgiveness, in making mistakes due to not having the right conditions, not having the right understandings, not having the capacity, the ability to do that. After all, the things that we are making here, we send them out to different places in Australia, tsatsas, stupas, and so forth. So Geshe feels that if we then add that into the intention, the motivation for making those statues, tsatsas, and so forth, then we have this good opportunity to make amendments to improve all the things that we do.
It depends on some of those. That depends on Tanga Shambayana, Kingur Shambayana, Pigi, Zavi, Tigni Chin, she was sending Chigurs, and it Tigula Sobota. Some of the one is not Telia, called Gibja the Chiva, and it Gug Shong Namalaya, the Siu Shujers. And you learn the delay at the Zoo Chagan, the Chamushivan Yomaros. The Medit Sambala in a touch sort that Dilaya in Jimmy Tandati, Manios Mazi Kainun, Tekunji Zonzeri Sagati, Zoso, this same thing the Chegosri. Some would not some of them die, and the Kenju one the time in the Chegos or some would do.
And also, sometimes we draw mandalas, we paint tankas and so forth. And when we create those paintings, they have to follow a certain grid, right? So you paint a grid, you draw a grid, and the grid has to be precise and correct. Also, in the literature of Tantra, there is a clear explanation of the substances, the materials that should be used for creating stupas and tsasas and statues and whatever needs to be whatever needs to go into them. There's a clear explanation of all those things, but we also have to acknowledge that here in this place in Australia, it's hard to find all those conducive condition present. We don't have all of them. So since we don't have here the facilities for doing everything correctly and perfectly, then we make do, but also it's important then to also add that bit of our intention, the motivation in asking forgiveness for things that we cannot do. One more is asking where we can find the verse for forgiveness of error in practice. So that's a good question. I don't know if anyone has it in their practice, the actual verse. Anyway, we'll try to find it for next time. There's one in Medicine Buddha. All right. In the Medicine Buddha Sadhana. All right, cool. 그런 디 직접 인지게 돌아 디 커요너스 그냥 하고 마선슬라인 디 가서 따초 그랬어. 맨라기 둡다 딜라요레스.
다들 사문에 얘기를 다 제도도 디 인지 털다. 사문에 열다. 직직이나 열에 사문에 열었지.
Yeah, we can probably find it in some other self-generation sadhanas that we normally recite. It is found in, for example, Yamantaka, Vajraparava, and other practices. So we can probably, I can probably bring it along for our next session if I remember. If I don't remember, I ask for your forgiveness.
Tirda Tinzata Duzu Pe Kishambu, the Duzuta Zavigita Chushok Chavajiras, the Duzu and a Kulon Sambuchton, the Chikpita Chushok Chavachigoras. In a D Yamdo, and in Azutachi Niba Sagayabana, that Chusho the Mandribi Chiksin the Nanga Chavachi on the Nebasaya Yimbaras. Imakazu Sayabadi Mumugaras, Tanda Sashimba. Mahomba Sangurim, but Jasjataman, the Tindig Samlejani, and Shadam China, and Pendo Pechembuyosares.
Anyway, it does happen that within our actions or activities affiliated with the Dhamma, that we do them together with folks. And needless to say that it goes without saying that we also do that when we become involved with our worldly affairs. We have done that in the past, we're doing that in the present, and we will still do that in the future. So it's important to also include practices for laying down those faults and purifying them.
Gunkas the dindil ya tanzo drochogoda tidrikale ya nejlan drivekatla and jetsenzemak kuch shanyag and parkonch chonshas tazanla
Senzema.
Jetsenzema and be sebum chalana dang jermuch kundajora. Ani nganzula shanchus that day and is sadim pearl mixing Sadinalaya Chemada Dotsawin Mending Sanjambu Church or Didzi a dig Kundat Shangorda Kundat Paragorda and to do Gamba Tsugi any Tambo Lava Truchu Teni Sanki and Zamas any Karikap Teni Kunda Shanziria Mixima Macheva Kirchu or Dinichitos. This is Chigors.
Drumchuk said, Dila Drumchuk. Dunta sum Drumchuk la digides. Drumchu said it in Karina.
Drumchu Tangan King could be a sopa and chogatel. Drumchu.
Ham Mixichi, Yemen Ham in Domida.
Sunday Jigson, some don't wash.
Geshe remembers that when he was still in Tibet at the age of, roughly speaking, 16 years old, he was already ordained, but he didn't live in a monastery at the time. He was still living with his family, but still a few times a year there were occasions for monastics from all over the area to come together and do some activities together. One of them was the period of the summer retreat, which is a ritual for monastics. So they do it together for a few weeks. So that's during the summertime. It's called in Tibetan Yavne, or the summer retreat. Then in the winter, there was a period of 3 weeks in which monks came together to do some practices involved with High Yoga Tantra, recitation and certain concentration practices involving High Yoga Tantra deities, Trakasambhara, Guya Samaja, and so forth. Anyway, for those occasions, there was a statue that was being constructed, and it was constructed of clay. So the statue was a statue of a deity called Geshe Tsultrim. I don't know what deity is it in Sanskrit, but anyway. So this statue was created from clay, and in the creation of this statue, you have to pick sand or soil that is not mixed with stones or pebbles or pieces of grass or what have you. So it has to be completely pure or clean. So you gather that clay. Then in the process of creating this statue, you also have to wash your hand properly. Then you you blow incense on the raw material in order to purify them. Then you wear kind of a scarf or something to cover your mouth as you go through the process of recitation. So everything is done kind of in a proper way, but still together with that, you also then at the end ask forgiveness for the things that you haven't been able to done well.
The yin go does Kazana the go at Kazanazuta Namju can manje that dinangors that ye Lagombi Kabdulaya Rani Kabdu Rang Lude Lagulaya Gom Chogumadas. The Gomba in the nearby race Kazana Pig Shari do in Shada Ribat and the Talas of tribute Motagara Lagula Gomna di Lagula and Gurmasi what it does. There's a deep Gombaina and in never child of race. The ding never child of Shizongi Pilai Kushan Digi and Samachi Mashambaina did dream about the Chibuchi Yaros. Samachin Shangi Obana, Samachin Shan Chigi Obana, Samachin Chi Lavatos Samasu. And the Kaptu Ibanaya and it picking contraside there, my Bakalia, and it's somebody change same the contraside to cigarettes or Saza cigarette. Those are we can use some. Indeed, the subs shoe chivana and it could chick shambatilia and it so labuchi sagaba, ro mambanaya, rani, pitachi kukari Tingolia, and it's sankiagi. And it's Pacha Kavachin, Shadow Yobadi, Yazatamba res, love chogosares, raw.
So this attitude is certainly something that is needed, particularly when we think of some of the practices that we do. So we practice, for example, a self-generation sadhana, in which we meditate on ourselves as being a deity. Now, in the process of meditating on ourselves as being a deity, we arise into the form of a deity. Now, when we arise into a form of a deity, it's not that we think of this body that we have now, which is a body of flesh and blood and bones and so forth. It's not that we think of this body as becoming the body of a deity. And if we do meditate on it in this way, in which we think that this body, which is made of flesh and blood and bone and so forth, becomes a body of a deity, it is a faulty process. So in a similar way, we can then think that, actually, before I go into that, then if you do meditate on yourself as a deity, then you have to purify yourself into an empty state, and then from that to arise as a deity. So similarly, when you think of constructing statues and so forth, so just like it is not possible or not right, it is faulty to think of this body that is made of flesh and blood and bones and so forth becoming a body of a deity. Also, it is not suitable to create statues when you're not doing it in a clean way. So you wash your hands, you purify, and so forth. And through that, you create statues. In doing so, you create statues. So similarly, Geshe reckons that it could be that you're creating statues or you're painting deities and so forth, and you're doing those activities, but your mind is agitated. You're thinking of something, it makes you angry, kind of as you, for example, paint something, your mind is involved with anger. It's not really right to do it in this way. So if you make sure that you remain focused, and when you, for example, paint a deity, then you do it with a mind that is not under the sway of anger, it's not controlled by anger or other afflictive states of mind, then you accumulate powerful accumulations. And we can also think that certainly through that, you placed upon your mind this special imprints for attending in the future Buddha's body.
Diri dinzi tang anzu shakdam chiyo kadula yatan gyoba chesagita yul kang deshas ra oduzu tula shabi tonda ani gyoba che ani shakdam che ani nibali niban tong chinjil lebar tomgi insagi ra ani suzu nala ya chi kusung tutin tinti yoba na ani dindila ya chaksam se ani pimu tsuk che ne o tu samba namda chebay na 아니 배 팬도 연구였어레스 라 이 니번 통송 진짜 제자담을 지면서 디 제바이나 아니 니발 할도비 톱세 오니 톱 차가워서리스.
Anyway, so there's certainly many things that we can call to mind and develop regret for having done negative actions before. So when we practice such a practice of laying down negative actions, purifying them, then first of all, we think of the faults that we have done before. We recognize faults as being faults. And then in doing such a practice, then we can, first of all, visualize in front of us Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and such. We make prostrations with our body, speech, and mind. We kneel down. And then we can then think of the negative actions or the faults that we've done before. We see them as faults, and in our mind we think that I will turn my back on them. I shall not do them again in the future. So this is the third power, which is the power of turning away from further faults.
Magiwa Chuyan Tawa Tombati, then the Soju Sojukon, Gosum Gilinyunda, Chugi Tripachi Chupa, Jesuera, Chichiba, Tamji Jamba, Niminimboli Sonsos, Shebane, Domsum maybe, Shabat 600 Jovala, Goni, Chincheton, she long somba catch Javali Sheto, T-shirt Chinji Michibi, Domsum Kachawa, T, Kiwaya.
So let's read through this section. The third of the fourth powers is the power of turning away from faults in the future, which is to completely resist committing the 10 non-virtues. Sun Essence Sutra says that this destroys the karma of the 3 doors accumulated through killing and so forth. Everything you have done, caused others to do, or rejoiced in being done, as well as the afflictive obscurations and obscurations to the Dharma. The commentary on the Vinaya Sutra explains that the intention of the question, will you refrain from them in the future, asked in the scriptural passage, is that a confession without sincere mind of restraint is nothing but words. Therefore, the resolve to refrain from doing it in the future is crucial, though its development also depends on the first power.
Chubit Susu Samalong Dindi, and Pujala Soba, Digijala Soba, and Chubit Zenyon di Namju Suzu Kalali, Gyos, Yoda, Tezura, that Mena Miracle, Mena Injun Yogo Yomaris, Kang Yovach Pigilaya, and Susunala, Chutamaja the Yungaras, Digi Pujana, Kanji Kang Puberty, Sama Zanja, Susu Salong and Ton Longish. Pivaina, and it pay Abuchago series. The Mevaina, that and the Conjola, that Kesu said. Kesu Machina, Kesu Chadra in the Ingo series.
And in Namsachi Limba,
Namsa took the Layata, Namsa Pugura, but the Dicabdulaya, the Gibja to Suzuki, Kongochona, Komolongi, Suzuki Pijum Meguro. That didn't this some Yorkshire.
So then, for example, we sometimes make offerings. So in making offerings, we also need to think of the attitude, the motivation in making offerings. So for example, when you make offerings, you in front of representations of enlightened qualities of body, speech, and mind, you think that I'm making those offerings so that in the future or later on, when I clear away those offerings, I'll be able to eat it myself. So basically, kind of, you're making offerings and you think that actually I'm going to eat that in the future, or you're making offerings of things which are poor in quality because You think that I don't want to put more than that in making offerings. Of course, if you cannot make offerings, if you don't have the means to do it, you don't have to do it. You can also suffice with offering clean water. That's okay. But then if you develop an attitude that is dismissive or kind of despising, so to speak, attitude, and thinking that, well, I don't really need to make good offerings. I can just suffice with something that is of poor quality. Then the attitude is faulty. If, for example, you're making offerings of robes to statues, and you think that I'm going to offer something that I'm not going to wear myself, since it's of no use to me. I don't want to wear this, so I can actually use it for making offerings. Again, it is an attitude that is dismissive. It is a faulty attitude.
테레다 딘디 가주 sabsab chetuwa tichogi ani 다 군조리야 아니 chendong lega wasare 수중은 군조 짜침부 통침부 아니 딘디 돈다 대바용야 대바 숙치르로야 딘디 도고 wasare 대바 숙치르로나 대바 가주 숙치바 티초기 아니 군조고 진럽디 인중미와 라 랑길로디 교탄 대부 샘티 아니 둘레 하른로야 딘디 도고 wasare
Dullelawa.
Sem durslava.
Sem dullelawa. So whatever you so then you do whatever you can to your best ability. And when you make those offerings, for example, to the three objects, so those objects that represent the qualities of body, speech, and mind, and you regard them as being very precious to you, very important to you, you have high regards toward them, you have strong faith towards them, you will also swiftly receive the blessings of the objects that you make those offerings to. And also, your mind will become clear and more quickly subdued.
어디다 디어바이나 다 쉐바 땡기 톱세디 땡기 톱주 점르드 셈게렌도스 다 점르 남다 라 콘졸라야 대바숙침부 여바이나 다 점르디 남다 차고라스 점르 남다 지여바이나 안 디제스 젠치니 껴비우 대다기 제순 제니 아니 지다 dombasumla soba chanjusembi dombazu chanjusembi dombalembal라 soba 아니 지 인지 거면 잠바 거면 잔주고 샘 거면 디 아니야 좋아 체르로그라스 디 가준 좋아 디 쪽이 아니 땡기 톱디 다 오늘 톱 차고 와서라
Now let's look at the fourth power, which is the power of the basis or the power of the support, right? So, or the power of reliance. So the fourth power is called by different names: the power of the basis, the power of support, the power of reliance. So it includes going for refuge and developing bodhicitta. So if you have strong faith, if your refuge is pure refuge, you think of the objects of refuge in front of you. And also you then take upon yourself one of the three tiers of vows, or either a pratimoksha vow, or the bodhisattva vow, or the mantra vow. You meditate on loving kindness and compassion and bodhicitta. And with refuge and bodhicitta, you become more enthused about the development of loving kindness and compassion. So when you think of the power of reliance, you really come to rely upon refuge and bodhicitta when you do so.
제다 제 군졸라야 대비 대바 아니 군졸라 캡스트리 캠르야고 지하바이나 아니 기위 차와 가르치바이나야 가시 트로싱 아니 제징그로스 라 안자다 두스페나 답페나다 가봉이 최시거라스 최시아바디 나랑기 최시아바디 나랑기 기위차와 임바디 응은진 투비토니 니 최시아바이나 아니 최시비 깔려야 지 karsoda mission ganare maganare tele gyabgyur chenare machenare ngale kebachi yo mares kasna ngarang gyodro go mato anji mission baji gaya chedu chigiyo marwas time di zambala kanji susu pape bojin kores benang azu chochoondigi chochoya di sususuge 비 개워드비야게 체도 초초거를 모두 미셴바지기 아니 체도 저지 말어 왔다 지당 섬자 탐질에 메니 디치워드네 간지 조 소수기 아니 샘규디 야부용약 체도 초초거라스 델리아 순냠주 채널에 마치너리 개박하면 소소소 비 개워사야지 용거 디 딜레바이나 강 로바텔리아 박페부 샘바기부 야지야다면 용거레스 매바이나 아니 테네 마기바치 로 취시바이나 마기바치 덴번덴바이나 마기바치 가즈나 미셴바지 비 남귤레야 따디워스 디 추 로단데다 베든가와레샤스
So when we have faith, right? So we begin with faith and then we also go for refuge. Then whatever we do with faith and refuge is done with joy and a sense of enthusiasm. Like, for example, Geshe here, as it says, is giving Dharma teachings daily. So at least in terms of his attitude, if he recognizes that leading those sessions constitutes a virtue, this is virtue, then whatever he teaches, that becomes for him virtue. Then regardless of whether someone is happy with those teachings or not, regardless of whether some support him or some do not, it doesn't make a difference. Just when you think of, I'm teaching the Dharma, and for me, that becomes a virtue, then you adopt this light-hearted and comfortable state of mind with respect to it. So this is, you can say, part of the reason why we come together here, right? So we come together, we can say that, part of our coming together is so that we can be of benefit to others, but actually we can also think that we here come together because we want to create virtue. I want to create virtue for myself. So if you think about it like that, whenever you do it, whenever he teaches the Dharma, then his state of mind, it becomes happy and relaxed. 100%, there is a sense of ease that comes with developing such an attitude. Whereas if you think that I'm doing that so that others might come to like me, or if you expect others to treat you well, or kind of the body language would be supportive of you and so forth, Geshe reckons that there will always be a sense of discomfort or unhappiness that will be present if you think that I'm doing that so that others might approve of me.
Tirida danganzu delaya jikshegorda zo lamsorum jik kagon shizung toni and the lebshabajire levni ta jik susug nibala pabi ta sambanam da chidi gibi queens ine kashi da legmaros malena legmadus Samsung Magaro not conjopons Chemandos. The Lengensu Jesura Tujicere, Nanzu Yamrucheni, and Chini Shichia, the Pemas Love Chiri, Yaburo, or Dindidoj, Lena Le Malen Male. Or this Kadinara and Sotonari, Chishinari, those Kuyambuch and Rojawana, and Susu Kuyambuchagares. Or the young Shinian Trosons.
After all, it was Kyabje Lama Sopa Rinpoche's wish for Geshe to come here, right? So Geshe came here as a request or instruction of Lama Sopa Rinpoche. So having come here, Geshe is teaching here the sessions, at least from his side, with a genuine attitude, with a pure attitude. So then some come to the teachings, some do not come to the teachings. But Geshe doesn't think that, is not concerned with those who do not come to teachings. This is their business, so to speak. If you think that, well, Lama Sopa Rinpoche sent me here to teach, doing those teachings. I'm creating virtue. People come together here, right? So we come together here at the Gompa. We're creating virtue together. We don't need to think of who's coming, who's not coming, and so forth. Just can think of we're creating virtue, and just be happy about it, happy and relaxed.
Teredenza kanji kyamro semge chanju semti tengi to tidru kora ta di drubya di ta negav goba tadu goba ta goba mambu shoch kyores ra negav goba di susu phaphebu ani semba kibu yongya dia ani chik kyamro semge yabu yobaina kaduna phaphebu yongsares 야제 야다마다 디 용그레스 로 테니 타투 고바네 타와드 탐지 김비 공반레다 사가 아니 간솔이야 고버드야 키요 마레스 티니 아니 잠르 셈길 때네 드투요레스 인자 네가단 타두 고던 탐지 드투인디 아니 잠르 셈기 땡기 토블야 라레 데반자 델야 칸투 추투 소술릉아 이스음라야 니바 칸요바디 델라 드림닌 로데바이나 message to them said chagdos and digba ranching thought was res
now looking at the power of reliance, it says the fourth of the four powers is the power of reliance, which is to go for refuge and cultivate bodhicitta. So the fourth power, the power of reliance, is about refuge and bodhicitta. So when we go for refuge, when we develop bodhicitta, then we accomplish a certain purpose. There's a temporary purpose and a final purpose that we attain from refuge and bodhicitta. The temporary purpose would be through going for refuge and developing bodhicitta, our mind is made more at ease, happier. It is made more at ease and happier with refuge and bodhicitta. And in terms of the final purpose that we secure with refuge and bodhicitta, there is no higher or better final goal than for us than the state of liberation and the state of enlightenment. And they're also achieved through refuge and bodhicitta. So in that way, we use the four powers of the antidote, including the last one, the power of reliance, in order to purify our negativities.
레다 잠르 생기 칸다지 곰고레 잠르 칸다지고 단 간주 만체다 킹그라스라 잠르 아니 군조숨레야 담보 군조숨레야 이체바디 군조숨레야 이체 용야래야 상기레 이치고도스 상기라 이치게 따지 균생 삼루타네 상기라야 이치기야기 균생 삼루타요레스 라 상기기에 아니 코랑 체도 많이 봐 심전 탐지기 대기기 체도 아니 kawacheche ani dribakenche lovnyer cheche ta pigin chugi neluk chetawa sendo sikchene ani dujalaya chutwen babochi chagde yawadi gyasi gyatamares tinza tinti kewdi nganzo gokol lutigla soba gyagjan la soba di sawani ni she mesigwa kanzan korang thandala samlu chi tanga mare ani di gyagjan she goya gobokore yomares tinza gyasi gyatama ichi che choya Ria samni ichi chebaina sangil kyapsundri kyamro ta temshu chik chagores ro.
And as the fourth power is the power of reliance, in relying upon refuge and bodhicitta, you might be wondering, how then do I meditate on refuge and bodhicitta? How then do I meditate on refuge? Well, you begin with, first of all, developing trust in the three objects of refuge, the three jewels. And to develop trust in the three jewels, you need to first off develop trust in the Buddha. And developing trust in the Buddha is done through thinking of reasons for trusting the Buddha. Reasons such as, for example, thinking of the Buddha working hard, accomplishing the practice himself, coming to see reality directly, attaining the state of Buddhahood. All of that was done for the sake of others, without being concerned for his own welfare. All of those things were done for the benefit of others, and therefore it is not possible for the Buddha to lie. It's not, no, we normally lie with a sense of concern for ourselves. So the Buddha or a Buddha is motivated by a sense of concern for others, and therefore thinking of the trust as we develop in the Buddha, then we think of someone that was motivated by this altruistic wish to be of benefit to others is not someone that is going to deceive us.
제 산지 좀 된데 난 잠불이나 편 논이 또 죽여서 지게 시고로 따라 간지 죽여를 사갔어. 차사레스 디 공라 송샤비 까메도서 다 드럽 단디 뒤래 앞에 아니 미스르지 코바나야 이용 trouble 라 이용 trouble 단디 뒤서 다다랑 송샤지고 소르지 마다베게 베 아니 지속님비 계좌 소르지 라 난주 룩스 임바나 룩스 님바도서 룩스 카시 짜원이니 초매교 공코 매교지 통고도 왔더라 이내 디 뒤려야 아니 메조 이용 trouble 가메쳐서 딘디 용 trouble 이내 다 드럼 규론디 아니 교화태신데 짜원이니 초매교딘디 망부여라서 이내 산지 송샤교 아니 피 칙도서 다 드럼 니낭로야 다 미낭기다 아 지당기 시대에 남주 프로도 총댕이 아니 세리바 임바이나야 아니 산지 까멜라야 이용 trouble 어 딘티게 송행기 깨버들어야 샘딘이 이지치 초거러스 딘디 싸움다니 아니 산지기 연된 딘디 싸움다니 아니 산지래야 아니 이지체바나 겸도 남다레스
And when we develop trust in the Buddha, then we think that the Buddha, the Bhagavan, was active or lived in India 2,600 years ago when he gave those teachings. And those teachings are still relevant to this point in time, to this century. And when you think of how they're still relevant to this time, then you can find them inspiring. They're still contemporary, those teachings. For you can think of some texts or teachings or scriptures that are found sometimes in the world, which were given at some point in time and not necessarily relevant to this day and age. We follow different cultures or different traditions, and not everything with our culture or tradition is actually relevant to this point in time. There are things that we do in our cultures or traditions that we have done them for a long time, since time of old. And they're not really, you can say, useful or have a purpose at this point in time, but we still do them. But with the teachings of the Buddha, the Bhagavan, it is not like that, because Geshe reckons that when you think of what the Buddha taught, you can see that it is still valid to this point in time, to this century. And even people that study that on an academic level, those that can kind of thinkers and so forth, they can still, Geshe feels, become really inspired or develop the sense of affinity to the teachings that the Buddha gave. So Geshe is making this point just in order to then think of the qualities of the Buddha, to develop trust in the Buddha, and through that to develop a pure sense of reliance upon the Buddha as part of the fourth power, which is the power of reliance.
Zumba demba chasi maros. Tinza Tirup Kazus Jurnaya, Piggy, Sondele, Gomebadi, Kartengorslandi, Muyo Nitsu Shila Shachin, Chambu demba song Wanza, and in Giordrug Maris. Tando in a Tirup Kazus Jovan Jelaya, Tirup Kazus Jelen, sometime by na Jasajatamba, Giordru Sigmaris, Kunguyan is Son Javanza, but Dintrig songing, Kewitigi, Lamden Shabige, and it's Pigita, Golong Chu singing the Yatachu, Ian Tajure, Samne, Samtana, and it Chukunjolaya, Capsun Dogores. Then Jig Sanji Sonjavati, Chik Suzu Gulaya, and it Drenchin, Titolaya, and Bezun Chidingi, and in Pabikanza, Gendung de, and it Chiksumi de la Soba Tidlaya. I think one Kukurda, Sikurda, and it Gawa Gombaina, and it Gendun Kunjolaya, and it Capsundri, Jamdu singing the Chagores, the Diabu Giovanna, then the Chanju, and it's Diabu Giovanta, Semgi Gomia di Pelela Dogres.
And thinking of the teachings of the Buddha, being truthful, if something is true, it cannot become a lie. Even when you check that through the passage of time, even many centuries later, if something is true, something is correct, it does not become incorrect, or it does not become a lie. As the teachings are based on reality, it's not that at some point they become obsolete or they become a fallacy. They still hold true. Which brings us to the second object of refuge, which is the Dhamma, consisting of true paths and true cessations, which are still valid, they're still true. And then the third object of refuge, the Sangha, for example, the ordained and so forth. So when we consider them to be those that practice the Dhamma, develop the Dhamma in the mind stream, when we develop a sense of respect and appreciation to them through going through the process in which we develop trust in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, a refuge becomes pure refuge. And if a refuge becomes a pure refuge, the cultivation of the bodhicitta is made easier.
당부 아니 겸주 체온디 다 겸주 동바 라 겸주 동바디 다 미기주 봉고 수rum 송야 디레도 다다 미기주 봉고 수rum디 아니 베나다 룽아기 레드인로징인 바이나 조 비기다 셴란 네바 시단 제바 동비기 동바지 차가도 담보니 비기려야 아니 지 셴란 만나와 지야지 라 산지비 추고 자오디 아니 랑기 케빈 간다지 두고 여바나야 디기 셴라 만나바시 아니 존나 셴라 만나바마스 셴라 펜도 여바시 제거야디 산지 위치우기다 미유로 디레도스라.
So we first off go for refuge, and when we go for refuge, first we might take upon ourselves a vow in which we commit ourselves to ethical discipline that abstains from the 10 non-virtues. And mainly what we abstain from, what we restrain, is the 7 actions of body and mind. After all, what we're aiming at is abstaining from harming others and the basis of that harm. We restrain harming others and the basis of that harm. So whatever we do that in thinking that I shall not harm others. If a certain situation is going to be profitable to us, nonetheless, we will abstain from harming others. Not only we will abstain from harming others, also you can say that the essence of the Buddha Dhamma is not just to abstain from harming others, it is doing that with a sense of concern.
Tirda anji ngazum mijiye za chishu rodi ani lu longcho getsa seti ngazu za chishu jire dos ro ngo gyaba na ya ngo ya zele ya yakshu di susu lu longcho gewa gewitsa digdi shagodos ta dela manaba ro manaba sheng lu longcho getsa de chebala ya manaba tonen roto wana ta di midi chang buchagores demba chagores ro pena lula maneba pena so chobela soba digda lula neba jong di so chongro goras ani chi jeng penjola soba ani gogo luji tanchin lanyala soba ani mi nimbu tan lanyala soba chena sheng lonjul negoras ani chi sheng semgang la poyagi ani tsig tindi peju chiala soba namgyur tindi tembayna sheng sem chuchene ani sheng yugi gezal negoras tiza dindi ta kanji chambu shu chechin tabki shu chin robayna ani sanji wi chobain sares te mebayna ani choban namda sede kabure dos ro.
And in terms of abstaining from harming others, and the basis of that harm, we consider the things that are the most precious to us. Our body is precious to us, our resources or possessions, and our roots of virtue. We also use them when we make dedications. We dedicate our body, possessions, and roots of virtue. So we abstain from harming others. And when we abstain from harming others, we do that on the basis of developing an attitude that is honest and truthful. So for example, being honest and truthful, we abstain from killing. The action of killing is harming somebody else's body, the body of others. Or we might harm, not only kill them, but also harm them in a different way. We might harm their possessions, take away the money, wealth, resources, and so forth. We might lie in order to do that. We might act in a fraudulent way in order to damage the resources, the resources. We might use words which are offensive. Our body language or physical attitude might also be offensive. So all those different ways are ways of harming others. So in developing an attitude of non-harmfulness, we abstain from all of those forms of harm. Physical, harming others' body or resources, possessions, and the roots of virtue. And when we abstain from all of that harm in our interactions from others, we become perfect practitioners, Buddhist practitioners.
다직 잠바데 닌지 슈첨보 레온디 아니 직 생기 체도 레가지 마진 자원이 지금도 삼성기 로직 레고사레스 다시 현대 주통행기 아니 직 소소레 니바지면 지금도 삼바 안 디체도 상기 공마직 되는 이고 삼바 땐때 연구여사레스 다 딜레바나 다 잔주고 셈세디 디레스 로 잔주고 셈 공공스나 로드 딘디지기여바나 메디 잔주고 셈 공구여레스 dim메바이나 아니 시카르모 카르텐데냐 잔주고셈 무스 곰바디 차에 가버린다 하시라.
And then on top of that, we meditate on loving kindness and compassion. And through that, we think that it's not going to be right for me to not be of help to others. Not only that, when we meditate on love and compassion and through that develop bodhicitta, we think that unless I myself will become Buddha, I will not have the ability to be of benefit to others. And therefore, I need to become a Buddha to be of benefit to others. In this way, we develop bodhicitta, which gives us a certain courage, right? It is a determined or courageous mind seeking the state of enlightenment for the sake of others. So without going through the process in which we meditate on loving kindness and compassion and developing bodhicitta, we might be reciting this verse. We might be reciting the words of going for bodhicitta, but it's not going to cut it. It's not going to be enough. Without really meditating on that, cultivating loving kindness and compassion and bodhicitta, saying the words is not going to be enough.
Le tambowe digba jongyo gonhatsu shik songkyang nimbo yonsu zobon tobshi samawos toto tinsarda.
Looking at the next thing that Lama Tsongkhapa says, the victors say that in general there are various ways for beginners to purify bad actions. Although the fully complete antidote is the 4 powers operating together.
Digba talunes ngandru dongar chimbu kiwi gyunam dongar chonga kiwi gyugyo ngandru kegyan di dongar munyowa tadi tanlango nawa zamji kyan tanin rowata 대신 그 유름보 용거는 윤통용 때 용무거는 줄때 대양 종캔 또 체종다 님보 또시 조 맞었다 슈타메다든 유린통 소지권의 예배 타직등 예배매도 도대단 도안에 레는 까와야는 춤사 시송반네 또시 님보 공범매발라 공기 또시 님비 샤바터 자나네 뇽에게 타바 자동제발 송소 대달 샤바다 담발라 소비 남민진비 누바 냠바 제바 남네 Ken Shedan Tegan, Namanjima Mingula, Tejan the Loda than Condricate John Bayan, Java Togan Bawale Sonso, Shadam Gilhama Maluba, Tadu Chuga, Tamboni Nimi Magu Tabata, Shabi Tabani Kechede, Pena, Chansali Zadon Joala, Chansam Domba Lambe, Chirchu Nuga, Setela, Satambo, Tomasigo Sombatan. Number Tower, Dubin Dolica, Do Tennis Shebi, Chubongi Deban Joa. Shiki, Lo Dungi Part the Niration, Tusum the Shani, Deba Tajan, Chetar Nian Sobotovala, Kawachuko Sonso. Tena, Maluba Tapitane, Jebu Yuduman Jimba Maluba Taba Ingi, Lamgi Toba Kiva Son, Chirin the Joa Yembe, Tambuni Makubalam Beba, Kacheo, Teacher Pavan Nam, Sogichayan, Digdon Tamijan Shijan, Munjiva Son, the Shabbe Tabatan. 담보는 마주하니 캐메나 대다차 먹을 비체로 직대나야 깔로서 네버 칠주여 수여자 담보는 만해받아 문자바시노스.
All right, let's look at the next section. It says the manner of purification. So using the four paths of the antidote, the manner in which negativities come to be purified is as follows. The manner in which bad actions can be purified is as follows. The causes for the arising of great suffering in the lower rebirth are transformed into causes for the arising of minor suffering, or if one is reborn in the lower realms, one does not experience the sufferings. Or having been purified, they result in a mere headache in one's present life. Likewise, something that would need to be experienced for a long time is transformed into something of short duration, or that does not need to be experienced at all. There's no categorical certainty here because it also depends on whether the power of the person doing the purification is great or small, and on whether the four opponent powers are complete or incomplete, intense or not intense, of long or short duration, and so on. The statement in the sutras and the Vinaya that actions will never be lost, even in 100 eons, implies if the antidote of the four powers are not cultivated. Also, commentary on the perfection of wisdom in 8,000 lines says that if purified in accordance with the explanations, even karma certain to be experienced is purified through the antidote of the four powers. Blazes of Reasoning says that once you have thus weakened the potential to bring forth a fully ripened effect by means of confession and the resolve to exercise restraint and the like, the fully ripened effect will not come about even if other conditions are met. Conversely, wrong views and anger can similarly overpower the roots of virtue. Although through confession and the resolve to exercise restraint, you may be able to purify karma so that not at all remains, there is still a big difference between the purity of not being tainted by faults from the beginning and the purity after confession. For example, Bodhisattva level says that if a rude downfall has occurred, it can be restored by taking the Bodhisattva vow again. But it will be impossible to reach the first ground in this life. Also, the gathering all the threads sutra says that once the bad action of abandoning the Dhamma, which is explained in that sutra, has occurred, if one confesses it 3 times every day for 7 years, the bad action will be purified. But it still will take 10 eons, even at the quickest, to attain the level of forbearance on the path of preparation. Therefore, purification without remainder means that the production of unpleasant effects is purified without remainder. However, since the arising of realizations on the path and so forth will be much delayed, you should try not to be tainted from the beginning. Also, for that reason, it says that Arya do not deliberately engage even in subtle bad actions or infractions, even for the sake of their lives. If there were no difference between purifying them through confession and the not arising from the beginning, there would be no need to act like that. In the mundane world too, sorry, I think that it crashed, just a second. that it crashed again. Oh. Right. So it says in the mundane world too, if a wounded arm, leg, and so forth heals again, still it will not be the same as if it had been it had never been wounded to begin with.
Yeah.
So all is asking, is the Sangha just mentioned by Geshe-la's Arya Sangha to be considered a source of refuge, or all Sangha, including ordained and lay? Dila kuncha sumla kesu join gendungi kunchorwa. Dila kabdila papes gendula lagirve yamna gendun se dila yandi ratu jo kona la sigiorve yamna mika yandi kaukabla yandi gendula yandi sigiore skandichinas.
Je papi gendula Lavuyores, Sunguyores, Papi Gendu, Penataji, Papi Gendungia, Jesu Juchene, and a Rabshon Solaya, Tananda, Kubata, Chenton Yabana, and then Papi Gendula, Yongbaro Chagra, the indigenous sugars, Mado, most sons of the Papi Gendures. Pitaji and then Palam Toba Gula Dending, and Papi Kansa, Tuzures.
Papagetun dilayan di Rabjunta Mikaniga Chogro.
Chogro.
Now, with respect to the objects of refuge, the Sangha, the actual Sangha refuge is called Arya Sangha or Superior Sangha. So then in one's practice, if you develop a sense of respectful or venerating attitude towards ordained people, then you, in your mind, think about them as part of the Arya Sangha. But still, in terms of the object of refuge itself, the object of refuge is the Arya Sangha, and there are monastics, but also lay people that can be included within the Arya Sangha.
Did George show you as a cousin Lamrim that Mancha Nomalia, Gamdril Habja Sondi, Pigita, Gendu Conjolaya, Kubakoya, Gendu Conjolaya, Kuba, and Kiwi Chedo, and the Chik Rabjongu, Ku Pigi, and Taruk Samin Baina, Ra, and Peace Chinjon Samin Baina, Telia, Kuzikoya, Songodas, Tindi Kuzi Mebana, and the Chik Gendu Conjol, Labja than Gadroya, or did this Songodas, Ra?
We can connect it together with the teachings on the Lamrim, which says that when you, having gone for refuge, when you train in the precepts of going for refuge, you develop certain attitudes. Like, for example, the attitude that you develop towards the Sangha is a respectful attitude, to the point in which when you even see a piece of the robes of a monastic, you think about it as something that belongs to the Sangha, you think about it as an actual Sangha, and through that you develop a sense of respect. So so this is part of the training that you take up having gone for refuge.
Sure.
Let's leave it here for today. So we will end up with reciting the final Lamrim dedication. Just a second. For my two collections, fast and space, that have amassed from working with effort at this practice for a great length of time, may I become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose minds, wisdom, eyes blinded by ignorance. Even if I do not reach this state, may I be beheld in your loving compassion for all lives, Manjushri. May I find the best of completed graded paths of the teachings. May I please all the Buddhas by my practice, using skillful means, drawn by the strong force of compassion. May I clear the darkness from all the minds of sentient beings with the points of the path as I have discerned them. May I uphold Buddha's teachings for a very long time. With my heart
Siji
growing up
Jave
with great
Mejong
compassion, in
Chenele,
whatever
Medu
direction the
Chanju
most
Lamji
precious
Rendi,
teachings have
Tante
not yet
Namji
spread,
Yela Parden
or once
Shin,
spread have
Jayan
declined,
Zavadi,
may I reveal
Luchongi,
this treasure of
Longsa
happiness
Jivin,
and
Tujen
aid.
Tushijin, Kajin
May the
Sijin,
minds of those who wish
Medan,
for liberation be
Tiru
granted
Gonzo Jayan
bounteous peace,
Novaye,
and may the
Longda
Buddha's
Longda
deeds be
Jayan
nourished
Maji,
for a long time
Kanze
by
Teban
evenly
Cholo,
spreaded path of
Suju,
enlightenment,
Suju Juga,
completed due to the
Sambati,
wondrous virtue
Tuden
of
Namji
the
Datu
Buddhas and their
Doji,
sons.
Chaji
May
Jam,
all humans and
Shogun
non-human beings
Chao
eliminate adversity
Gyuji.
and create conducive conditions for practicing the excellent path, never departed in any of the lives from the purest path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes effort to act in accordance with the tenfold Mahayana virtues practices, may you always be assisted by the mighty ones, and may oceans of prosperity spread everywhere. Thank you.